Hello and welcome back to another edition of YCT Matters. This is Carol Platt-Liebau, president of Yankee Institute, and today we are delighted to be joined by Andy Markowski. Andy is a principal of Statehouse Partners, and we are delighted to have you with us, Andy. Thank you for joining us.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Carol.
And it is the day after the elections here in Connecticut, Wednesday, November the 6th. And we are going to talk through some of what we know and some of what we think we know and why we think we know what we know and what we don't know. And as Donald Rumsfeld might have said, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. And there is no one better to do it than you, Andy. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, I'll try to do my best to a Monday morning quarterback, or I guess a Wednesday afternoon quarterback here after the elections.
Right. There's nothing better, right, than to get to sit in retrospect and talk about what should have happened and didn't happen and could have happened and woulda, shoulda, coulda. So here we are. So thanks for being with us. So as we sit here right now, Andy, it looks like we have about everything has stayed status quo, about 24 Democrats and 12 Republicans in the state Senate.
That's what it looks like as of this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. But there are still votes being counted in two particular Senate races. One over in Windham County in eastern Connecticut. Incumbent May Flexer was in a tight race. She was in a tight race last cycle as well. But if the trend continues as the count comes in, it looks like she will hang on there. So that's status quo. And then really the one to watch, and hopefully by the time your listeners get more information, is in the 8th Senate District. It's the Farmington Valley town. Senator Lisa Seminara is facing a very strong challenge from the Democrat Paul Honig. He's leading in the vote count right now. The outstanding towns are some that would tend to favor the incumbent, Lisa Seminara. But the question is, can it make up, the outstanding votes for the population centers of that district? So at the end of the day, it looks like the Senate will be status quo or perhaps change by one seat. And that's interesting because all of the speculation coming into this election was really the Senate was what to watch, that there could be a possible change of as many as 4 seats in the Senate. So I guess if you're looking at it from a scorecard perspective, status quo or perhaps, -1 could be considered a win for the Republicans in terms of hanging on. And the Democrats not being able to retake some of those seats could be considered underperformance on their part.
It is very interesting. I was interested in the 36th senatorial district. Ryan Fazio was considered to have a very stiff challenge from Nick Simmons, the brother of Stamford Mayor Caroline Simmons. Yet he fought back that challenge, and the race was called, by, 1:30 in the morning or so, and it ended up being less close than his last race against Trevor Crow, where there had to be a recount, and it was just really tight as a tick.
Yeah, I think that's the one that surprised a lot of people too, especially given all of the attention and the outside money that was spent on that race. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars that came into one state Senate race in Connecticut. That's on top of the public financed campaigns that the candidates themselves ran.
Well, and I think Nick Simmons self-financed.
Correct. That's correct.
And he is, his father, I believe, is a billionaire. And I mean, there was a lot of money that poured in and a lot of developers funded him. And he was very, very well financed. And I think a lot of people expected him to do much better than he did. And for the race to have been called before the next day really, was a testament, I think, to Ryan Fazio's strength.
Yeah, Ryan Fazio, relatively new to the legislature, served, one full term, and he, is the ranking member on the Energy and Technology Committee. He quickly made a name for himself in that role. And obviously the topic of, electricity costs and energy was a hot one on the campaign trail this summer across the state, not just down in the 36th district in Greenwich and Stamford and Lower Fairfield County. So it's certainly an issue that I think Ryan Fazio presents well on and comes across as a credible candidate on, someone who's knowledgeable and someone who had solutions. So it'll be interesting to see as the dust settles in the days and weeks after the campaign if that sort of policy focus on his part on the energy and electricity side helped propel him to victory.
Yes, he's someone who does consistently have really policy-oriented, common sense answers on a lot of topics. So moving into the House, what are your thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, so it's kind of a tale of two cities in a sense, right? Or I should say, things are kind of flipped in terms of the expectations, right? So I said earlier, coming into the election, everyone thought the focus would be on the Senate, and that's where there would be a bit of a swing. The thought conventionally was that the House, which going into the election was 98 to 53, Democrats to Republicans, that the House would remain relatively status quo. What we've actually seen is in the House a number of pickups by Democrats. We do not know the final count, but as of Wednesday afternoon, 20 or so hours after the polls have closed now, it's looking like it could be as many as +5 or +6 in the column for the Democrats. Um, there were a handful of longtime incumbent House Republicans who looks like have lost. And, on the flip side, there are a couple of longtime House Democrats who have lost. But, at the end of the day, it's a net gain for Democrats, it looks like.
Right, right. So let's talk a little bit about what your thoughts are, because we did see in terms of with the Trump victory, we saw New York moving to the right. We saw New Jersey moving to the right, and yet we see Connecticut, and we don't see that happening. And, that's an interesting question. What is different here that isn't, that didn't happen here, that did happen in New York and New Jersey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about it, this morning and throughout the day, and I'm sure many of us will think about it over the next week or so. Um, you know, there's the old saying, Tip O'Neill, that all politics is local. Um, and, that has pros and cons to it. And I think what we saw in this election was despite what looks like President Trump doing better than any Republican on a presidential ticket in Connecticut over the last several elections, that it did not carry through to the state legislative races. Um, does that mean we have still the old Yankee tradition of ticket splitting voters here in Connecticut? Does it mean that uh, candidates in Connecticut on the Republican line have tried to distance themselves from the president in his campaign? I should say the president elect in this case, former President Trump. And, you know, do voters see through that? Or is Connecticut in such an insulated or isolated state from the rest of the nation that, many of the national issues that were being talked about and many of the issues that resonated in the exit polling for whatever reason did not show up here? I think those are all, valid questions to ask, and I don't think we know the answers yet.
And, there is one thing that's interesting. When our state passed the citizens election program, the idea was to make it easy for people to be able to run for office without having to go out and face this prohibitive mountain of fundraising. And so it passed. And yet, even with the citizens election program, there were something like 40 House seats where Democrats ran unopposed. And that's interesting as we assess the merits of the citizens election program. And again, this isn't to throw shade, because it's very difficult. Ben Proto has a very tough job, and I'm not casting shade on any party or any party chairman. And as a leader of a C3, I would never think of doing that. I think, everyone is doing a good job. The leader of the Democratic Party is doing a good job. The leader of the Republican Party. I'm talking about this from a policy standpoint. One of the reasons that a lot of people urged the adoption of the Citizens Election Program is that it would encourage this not to happen, that it would encourage people to go ahead and run for office even when it seemed difficult because they wouldn't face this obstacle in terms of fundraising. But now we're finding that it really isn't fulfilling its objective.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you
I mean, you can't win a race if you're not even putting up a contestant.
a candidate, yeah, and it's like you said, the public financing is supposed to have made it easier than ever. In talking with people who are behind the scenes, people who work with many of the campaigns and candidates, candidate recruitment is a perennial issue. And one of the common complaints or frustrations I hear from people who are trying to recruit candidates and who are running campaigns is that people who maybe have held elected office at the local level and then are looking to make the leap to the state level are not always willing to necessarily put the work in, so to speak. And I don't mean the work of governing or lawmaking, but the work of campaigning. Because what they are told is, yes, we have a citizens election program in Connecticut. You don't have to raise funds. We can, work on that part. And yes, you can have your name on the ballot line for either the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, but simply having your name as the candidate on the ballot under a particular party line is not enough anymore to get you elected. It may still be in certain districts, but in other districts, you need to put in the time, the shoe leather, and the door knocking, et cetera, that a lot of candidates are not willing to do right now. And, I think it's not to besmirch any particular candidate. I think some of it is human nature. I think some of it is, we as a society as a whole have gotten very comfortable behind our screens, being on Zoom. We do our social networking online rather than in person. The old days of retail politics of, kissing babies and pressing the flesh may not be as naturally appealing to some people as it once was. But it still takes that level of effort to win a political campaign these days. So, certain candidates might not just have it in them. They don't want to make that leap from the local to the state level. But really, when you have 187 seats up for election every 2 years, and this cycle, when you had over 40 seats where there wasn't even a challenge, you're right. It begs the question, what else can be done from a policy perspective to encourage more people to run?
So, what else should we be thinking of? What are the implications in terms of the outcome of the election for the upcoming legislative session?
Yeah, that's what I look at the most, and that's what I'm interested in. So, starting in 2025, the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January, the legislature will convene for the start of their new legislative session. It's a long legislative session starting this year. There's going to be some reshuffling of the deck chairs. By and large, the leadership will stay the same in all four of the legislative caucuses, but we will see some new committee chairs and some new ranking members. To what extent does that focus or change policy decisions or policy agendas coming out of the legislature? I think it's a little too early to tell. But I think, if you look back at what people campaigned on, I think those are many of the issues that the lawmakers are going to want to tackle right out of the gate. And again, we already talked about one, the high electricity prices. 2025 is a budget year. The governor has the job of submitting his budget proposal to the legislature in February. There's a lot of talk about the fiscal guardrails, as listeners to this program know, and that's going to be something the lawmakers are going to focus on. But I think, as Connecticut looks to set its budget for the next biennium, a lot of people are going to be paying attention to what's happening in Washington, D.C. We've got President-elect Trump coming back into office. the Republicans have retaken the U.S. Senate. It looks like as of this afternoon, things are trending for Republicans to take back the House. One of the outstanding issues are changes to the federal TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that this next Congress will adopt in the upcoming year. Depending on what happens there, could have major implications on state budgets. So that's, I think, something that the governor and his team have to be cognizant of in terms of which way things are flowing in Washington, and particularly as it relates to things like the state and local tax cap, the SALT cap that came about in 2017 for the first time. So I think a lot of what's happening at the federal level could potentially influence the agenda at the state level.
When do you think we're going to have any sense of whether Governor Lamont is going to run again for a third term?
That's a great question. I've been saying that's the best kept secret in Connecticut politics for the last several months. I think now that the dust has settled on this election, I think give it some time for the new legislature to kind of get themselves seated. I would anticipate, early in the new year, if not by the time of his budget address in February, that he would give at least informal indication one way or another of what he's planning, because at that point, you need to give potential candidates, if he's not going to run, time to get their campaigns organized.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Andy, is there anything else that we should know that I'm not thinking to ask you?
The silence is deafening.
Yes, I know.
It's talk to me in another week, and we might have some more insight onto what just happened.
Right.
But I think a lot of people's perspective goes from the okay, what just happened to now what.
Right.
And I'm moving into the now what phase. We look ahead to 2025 and find out how the state legislature is going to operate, who some of the new players are, and what policies they're bringing with them.
Yep. Well, as all of this shakes out, you are definitely one of the top people we will be coming to for information and insight. And we are very grateful to you for making time to sort through it as we all start looking through what has just happened and what it means going forward. So thank you so much, Andy, for making time for us this afternoon.
Anytime, Carol. I appreciate you having me on.
And so that is Andy Markowski of Statehouse Partners. And Andy, thank you so much. This is Carol Platt-Liebau. Thank you for having joined us on this edition of YCT Matters. We look forward to having you with us next time.